Hello everyone, my name is Gao Ving. Today I will be discussing the functional movement of shooting a basketball. Here is the slow motion clip of Sam shooting a basketball. These steps are broken down into 4 steps: the approach, the setup, the forward throw, and the follow through. Now let's analyze the functional movements step by step. In the approach, the ankle joint or the talocrural joint is 10 degrees in plantar flexion, in the sagittal plane and the frontal and transverse axes. The knee joint, or tibiofemoral joint and patellofemoral joint, is 45 degrees in knee flexion, in the sagittal plane and the frontal and transverse axes. The hip joints, or acetabulofemoral joint, is 45 degrees in hip flexion along the sagittal plane and the medial lateral axis. The shoulder joints, or glenohumeral joint, is 20 degrees in shoulder flexion along the sagittal plane and the frontal axis. The elbow joints, or the articulatio cubiti joint, is 30 degrees in elbow flexion along the sagittal plane and the medial lateral axis. For the radiocarpal joint, there is 10 degrees in ulnar deviation and 10 degrees in wrist extension, along with finger abduction along the sagittal plane and frontal axes. The neck joints, or the elato-occipital joint, is 30 degrees in neck extension along the sagittal plane and the transverse axes. In the setup, the ankle joints, or talocrural joint, is 20 degrees in plantar flexion along the sagittal plane and the frontal and transverse axis. The knee joints stay the same, but the hip joints, or the acetabulofemoral joint, is now 20 degrees in hip flexion along the sagittal plane and the medial lateral axis. The glenohumeral joint is now 95 degrees in shoulder flexion along the sagittal plane and the frontal axes. The articulatio cubiti joint is now 110 degrees in elbow flexion along the sagittal plane in the medial lateral axes. The wrist joint, or radiocarpal joint, is 45 degrees in wrist extension along the sagittal plane and the transverse axes. In the radiocarpal joint, there is 25 degrees in radial deviation, finger extension, and abduction along the sagittal plane and frontal axes. Now in the forward throw and follow through, the talocrural joint is 40 degrees in plantar flexion along the sagittal plane and the frontal and transverse axes. The hip and knee flexion are now in 0 degrees along the sagittal plane and the transverse axes. The glenohumeral joint is 120 degrees in shoulder flexion along the sagittal plane and the frontal axes. The articulatio cubiti joint is now 70 degrees in elbow flexion along the sagittal plane and the medial lateral axis. The radiocarpal joint is 45 degrees in wrist extension along the sagittal plane and transverse axes. Now to shoot the basketball, the articulatio cubiti joint is going to elbow extend at 0 degrees in the sagittal plane along the medial lateral axis. The radiocarpal joint is 80 degrees in wrist flexion along the sagittal plane and the transverse axes. The finger joints are 100 degrees in finger flexion and adducted in the sagittal plane along the frontal axis. The contextual factor for Sam is that he has been playing basketball since he was 18 years old. Now that he is 40, his age has made it harder for him to recover from small injuries during basketball practice. He has sustained a torn right shoulder ligament that has limited his range of motion. For his lower extremity, he has undergone a left knee meniscus tear surgery. He also strained his left ankle due to the limited range of motion from the meniscus tear. Due to the injuries, he has stopped shooting basketball, which made his shoulder, knees, and ankles stiff. In order to regain his strength and endurance with shooting basketball, he must continuously practice and retrain the muscle. The physical environmental factors for Sam is that he is shooting basketball outdoors on the concrete. He has an adjustable basketball hoop that has a training equipment attached. The training equipment returns the ball to him, which helps him conserve energy from chasing the ball. Social environmental factors is that he is part of a basketball team that requires 5 people. Basketball can be physically aggressive with the opposing team pushing and shoving. The aggressive sport can be straining on the body. Changes that Sam can do to continue the occupation of shooting basketball is lowering the hoop to slowly retrain his muscles. Once his endurance returns, he can slowly raise the hoop higher. To reduce harsh impact on his knees and ankles from the concrete, Sam can opt to play at an indoor basketball court. Indoor basketball has hardwood that absorbs shock and reduces stress on the joints. Another change that Sam can do is change his role in the sport. He is a shooting guard for his team, which is the primary three-point shooter. He can switch to a point guard that catches rebound balls or shoot at a shorter distance. After working on this assignment, I have realized that breaking down the steps of a movement that happens in less than a second has shown me how complex body movements are. Body movements has become second natures to individuals with no complications. It's only when something goes wrong that we can stop and realize how we actually move. For example, Sam is very active and on the go. When his injury slowed him down, he did not let it stop him from his love of sports. He learned to implement other forms to compensate for his injury. I have always been aware of Sam's context and environmental factor. However, this assignment has allowed me to connect occupational therapy into a personal level. The information of body movement is more fun to learn when I can relate that information or use a model that I understand. I also feel that I'm able to connect Sam's context to occupational therapy. Therefore, I can connect with any clients that I am working with in the future. Many of my aha moments came when I had to break down the movements scene by scene. In person, the big movements of the jumping takes away the details of the upper extremity, flexing and extending. The tiny movements of Sam's plantar flexion also shows what a big difference it can make when you shift from 10 degrees to 20 degrees in plantar flexion. That's it for my video. Thank you for watching.